So welcome to, I guess, week 14 of our journey. We are we're making the turn into the sort of the final piece of this sort of puzzle, which is about the manuscript building phase. So we've been, we started out this process doing the get smart stuff, trying to learn, trying to gather, trying to learn how to interview, content, stuff like that. Then we've really spent the last 10 weeks really learning how to create a lot of the robust, rich content that's going to make it for the book. We did positioning calls. And now we spent the last 4 weeks really focusing on how to build chapters. So we're now in sort of the fourth week of chapter building. And really what's going to happen for the last 6 weeks here, that's starting kind of May 11th and beyond, is you guys are going to start just sort of focusing on shifting chapters to your editor. So where you've been sort of writing stories or writing content, whatever it is, now the goal should be to sort of work from next week going forward into submitting chapters every week to your editor for feedback on them. Take that feedback. You don't have to make the feedback, but look at it and kind of revise and repeat. So that's kind of what we're kind of moving into. And so tonight we're going to talk about the fourth piece of this sort of chapter building concept called chapter components. This sort of is the last piece that kind of helps you with a wrap a bow on a chapter before you sort of move forward. So we're going to dive into that a little bit more. Before we do, we'll just sort of do a quick little roundtable check-in with everyone. And then we'll talk a little bit about these chapter components. And then kind of at the end of this here, we'll give you guys some time to hang out with one another, chat, compare notes, and say how you guys are feeling. So yeah, so let me dive into some slides here for us for tonight, just a little bit. So week 14, that's kind of where we're at. Oops, that's not actually my slides here. Hold on one quick second here. Some different slides. Hold on just a second. Different slides. More time here. Recent. Here we go. Let's see. Okay. All right. So I'm try again. Now, let me take you into our slides. So here are the slides for week 14. And again, we're sort of in the fourth piece of this chapter building sequence. And tonight we're going to just spend a quick minute touching base, seeing how people are feeling, how's it going. Then we'll dive into the big piece tonight, which is all about chapter components, how to kind of understand what are the core components, sort of this checklist approach we're going to talk about. And then I'll give you guys some time to hang out. And really what we're going to be doing for the kind of following next 6 weeks is sort of this same sort of strategy, maybe about half an hour of time together, a little bit of check-in, giving you guys some chance to hang out with one another, to compare notes, war stories, complain about how you're feeling, whatever it is. Like that's kind of what we'll do this last bit of time here to give you guys something together. So before we dive into sort of the check-in with everyone, I thought I would just quickly put the reminder out there of what the next milestone is coming up, this Greenlight milestone coming up on Monday, the 11th. This is really designed, and sometimes people feel like stressed about this milestone. Definitely not something you should stress about. You should use it as a tool for yourselves, but it's really a good chance to get some feedback on where you're at. So whether you have 25,000 words or 15,000 words or 5,000 words, this really kind of doesn't matter. The goal here is to put whatever you have up into your content index by Monday morning. And really what that'll let happen is your editor will review it. Someone from the publishing board will review it just to give you a sense of where you are. And so that's kind of the idea, is if you have sufficient content and it's in a good enough format, kind of the newer stuff is really good, they'll give you a sense to say, hey, this is publishable. I think you're on pace. You should start thinking about some of the publishing elements. And if you're not, like, that's where your editor will sort of sit down and say, how do we get there? And so you'll hear first from your editor. They're going to go through it and basically get a sense of things and kind of talk to you and say, hey, listen, I'm recommending you for the green light, giving you sort of the publishing process, and that'll kind of give you that sense. So that's really what it is. Again, like I said, the biggest thing is don't get stressed about it, but use it as a tool. One thing I will tell you about this green light milestone that's kind of interesting is that, especially as you're now sort of making this push, getting writing there, deadlines can be a good thing to do. One of the things that I always tell people to say as they're trying to map out how they're going to attack this deadline is the following phrase can be your friend. For the next week or so, you're going to tell your family, friends, classmates, colleagues, I'm on a deadline for my publisher. Now, this simple line for you will help you a lot. It'll help you on two fronts. One, it's going to build this, essentially this pact with partners, friends, spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, and all those sorts of things. Because essentially what it does for you is it sort of helps you have some accountability together. But here's the other thing. It creates this bad guy who's not you. And so suddenly you put this mean, terrible publisher who's making you on this deadline. And sort of what'll happen here is you guys have someone to kind of work on together. So talk to people around you, use this as that milestone, make that push. And again, I think get as much content down as you can, because that'll really be a helpful piece of it. So that is the phrase that pays. I'm on a deadline for my publisher this week. And that can help you really make as much content progress as possible. So with that, how's everyone going? How's it feeling? Anyone want to share anything for the good of the order? How you guys are feeling, how you're doing? And yeah, then we'll kind of dive into the meat of it. But anyone want to offer their 2 cents on how they're feeling at this point, or any interesting questions or comments that you want to share for the group here?
Well, I don't know where you guys are located, if any of you have had any food shortages or changes in your grocery stores, or how you get food with restaurants being closed and takeouts being limited. I'm in Florida, so actually it's quite liberal, a little bit too liberal, like to the point of like fast food workers maybe or maybe not wearing masks. But like, anyway, I'm writing about, for those of you who don't know, about food security during this COVID thing and kind of how it's going to really redefine how we look at our food systems during this next decade. So for me, it's actually been crazy because as I'm writing, I'm also opening up like tabs and tabs of Google alerts for news. So it's very strange. But yeah, just wanted to check in with all you guys. I don't know where you guys are at, but has your food situation changed at all? I'm curious.
It's been, I mean, for me, like grocery stores have been the weirdest thing to sort of see how they're playing out, like letting people in slowly and all those sorts of things. So it's been an interesting thing here. Like, you know, some of them will like limit people. Like my in-laws were talking about how they have like senior hour where they only let certain people into Walmart at certain hours. So it's been interesting to see here. Yeah.
Yeah. We've been doing grocery delivery, Charlotte, and so I'm only ordering like maybe once a week. And so I get food anxiety, like I didn't, we're like trying to meal plan. And it's like when you send for grocery delivery, you don't know what you're going to get. So I'm like, that's kind of the struggle, is like, I'm so used to being like having access to anything I want for whatever recipe, where I'm like, well, I got 2/3 of this recipe and 1/4 of that recipe, and then some random something I didn't even order. I don't know what to do with it. So I'm having to put a lot more mental energy into what we're going to eat, because I'm not 100% sure what it will all be with grocery delivery, which I didn't really use a lot before. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Absolutely. It's helpful. Very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of what I'm dealing with.
That's what it's all about, is this shared experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
Welcome. Yeah.
So I know one thing that's trending in the Bay Area, everyone's like, we should ban all lawns and just plant food, and everyone should stop being so annoying.
Gardens is, yeah.
Yes, Bay Area. I love that. That last line, the ending line was the best. And stop being so annoying. Thank you for that. That's perfect.
Well,
That could be the title of the book, honestly.
that's right,
exactly. Everyone should plant lawns and stop being so annoying.
Books, you know, just stop. Just no.
Titled perfect. Just stop. Plant your lawn.
right,
We're done.
Anyone else have any other things for Charlotte, or for just general sense of book things and stuff like that they want to share? Otherwise, I can dive into the last sort of the piece tonight, the last of our sequence. Anyone else want to share anything with for the good of the order here?
I do.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I know my editor is being like super nice about.
I can't hear you. I think you went.
Hello?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, now.
I guess I'm curious if you have any strategy. I know we talked about like scribing, right? And how to produce a lot of words, but it still takes a whole lot of time, right? And so I guess I've been feeling really pressed lately because I'm still realizing how our routines still have changed. Like I'm still searching for a routine. Like they mentioned, going to the grocery store. It takes hours because when you come home and you're still wiping everything down, you're watching and trying to figure out how to do things. So I realized, like, I went to the grocery store on Thursday, for instance, and it took up my whole morning, basically. So it's like I have so much less time, and I'm still trying. And I know you say we can't be behind, but I really, truly do feel behind. And I'm also trying to see, like, I'm trying to sit down and figure out how do I change my day, right, with the kids and my husband working during the day. It's just like, but it's like I'm feeling overwhelmed. I just finished working out, so I feel good right now. I just feel like I really am behind, even though we say that's not a thing.
Yeah. Well, so you can feel that way, but it really isn't a thing, right? I mean, just to sort of say in this sort of way, because I think part of what I would tell you in this process to sort of see is that, you know, you can use that feeling to sort of either accelerate you or stop you, right? Like that's the sort of thing to think about. And I guess what I would tell you in this one is the goal here is part of the biggest thing that I always tell people from a mindset standpoint. And this won't necessarily help solve the, like, there's a lot of stuff going on, But what I would tell you is you're going to finish a first draft manuscript. The key thing to understand here is what degree of shitty is it, right? It's all going to be shitty, but is it really, really shitty, or is it modestly shitty, right? Like that's kind of thing to think about. And so in some ways, I think part of it is the this oftentimes this feeling, I just don't have enough time. There's not enough time. Really sort of means you just need to sort of find ways to create smaller pieces, and don't worry how good or bad they are. So that's part of what I would tell you is don't worry about trying to write this book. Chunk out small pieces. What can you do in 30 minutes? What can you do in an hour? And don't try to worry about more than that. I think the biggest thing you should be doing is, I've got an hour that I'm going to spend today, this week, this weekend, whatever it is. Spend that hour, get done what you've done, and celebrate that. It's kind of like going to the gym. You don't go there and sort of beat yourself up saying, hey, I was really hoping to run 12 miles and I only run 11. Like, no, I did what I could do in an hour. And that kind of mindset, I think, helps a little bit. And remember, we're just trying to get content down, get words down. And between now and the end of June, that compounds pretty quickly. So don't try to think about this writing a book. Think about that you're just writing content. And when you pull that stuff together, it's going to make things all the better. Trust me.
Yeah, a question and a comment.
Yeah.
So I found myself using outlining chapters and things like that almost as a way to procrastinate, because I was like, okay, I can do it this way, that way. So at a certain point, I'm just like, no, I know what this chapter is generally going to be about. Let me just write the content so I can get it written. And I don't know if you had particular feelings about that, but it seemed to work, even though it's kind of a hodgepodge of things right now and I need to connect it. But at least they're kind of heading in the same direction.
Yeah, that's the way you write these things, right? It's not like it is a hodgepodge until it's not a hodgepodge, right? It sort of is. It's the first pass through things are sort of very chunky and disconnected, but again, you sort of have those things. And so I think that's what a first draft, as you saw, when you look at what Nico's first draft was, it was a hodgepodge mess, but it was there, right? Like he had 30,000 words of hodgepodgey stuff. And you can then, once you have it all in one place and see those pieces here, sort of tweak through it. But I think that's, there's one sense here of like, I got all the structure down. Now I have no excuse other than to sort of fill in the holes, which I think is kind of what you were talking about there, which is good. And if that's your style, then I think, go for it. That's a helpful way to do it. So I like it. Other comments, thoughts? All right, well, let me take you to the last piece here tonight of the chapter stuff, and then I'm happy to give you guys some time to sort of brainstorm and share your strategies for sorts of things here. And next week, I'll share a couple little things about sort of how to create, more content for those that need it and stuff like that. But let me talk to you a little bit about chapter components. And what this sort of section is really designed to do is give you a sense of kind of like how we're going to pull this thing together. So chapter components is something new that I started doing in the last cohort. And it was really powerful. It helped not only with the chapter building process, but even with the revisions piece of it a little bit. And I'll step back a little bit here just to give you a sort of a context on what this is. And so there's this concept out there called the Checklist Manifesto. For those of you who've heard of it, it's this premise a little bit around that you can help anyone do complicated things if you're able to break it down and do a core step-by-step checklist of all the things they need to do. And this premise has actually been really, really powerful. One of the best examples of seeing it in action is seeing people in sub-Saharan Africa use this checklist manifesto to teach people how to deliver fairly complex medical procedures without any medical training, stitches, even some surgeries that basically can be done with the checklist. And so that premise has been really powerful to sort of help someone who doesn't have like lots and lots of experience be able to follow the process to finish something. Now, there's not a lot of wiggle room if they make mistakes. They can't improvise in the same way, but they're able to sort of execute pretty well. And so the example of where this actually originated from comes from the Cheesecake Factory. So how many of you guys have been at the Cheesecake Factory? And you guys been at the Cheesecake Factory? I assume everyone has, right? At some point, right? It's okay. We can all admit it together. But here's, for those of you who've been to the Cheesecake Factory, I want to ask you as a question. What is the most memorable thing about the Cheesecake Factory menu for those of you who've been there before? I want to know the most memorable thing about the Cheesecake Factory menu.
Massive.
Big it is, yeah.
Massive. They probably have like 8,000 items. It's insane how many items there are. It's probably 10x more items on there than any other restaurant you've ever seen. Like most have like 2 pages, maybe 3. This is massive. That's the first thing. The second thing is you actually look at consumer feedback on their dishes, on dish by dish basis. They consistently score in the upper, 20 to 30% on 10 to 30%, 20% on every dish. Surprising that they're able to deliver on, you've got pad thai, you've got fettuccine alfredo, you've got burgers, all those things under the same roof, which is kind of crazy to think about. So those are the two things. Now, here's the most important thing to understand. The Cheesecake Factory does not employ chefs. Chefs are people who have essentially been trained in culinary school to create dishes. These are not chefs. They are line cooks. Now, what's crazy about that one is huge menu, pretty good feedback on them. Like the dishes are all really well done for the most part, according to feedback, and yet not trained as chef. How do they do that? Well, part of it is because this idea of the checklist. They've invested in really making sure that anyone can follow this flow if you know the techniques. And so some of the same things that we've been doing are designed around that same premise, that most of you are not, masters of fine arts. You're not people who've studied the preposition and participle. I think Jeremy maybe studied the preposition, but the rest of us have never studied the participle. So part of the important thing to know here is that
I don't know what you're talking about.
No, I know. So this is designed to give all of you guys a good sense of how you can create better content because we're going to follow a little bit of a flow. So let me show you how this works in action. But part of this is to sort of understand not only how you can give yourself a checklist of what you're writing, but how your editors are going to be giving you feedback, as well as how you're going to get feedback throughout the revision process as we go. So the chapter components is really based on this sort of same premise we talked about before. Remember, every single chapter is basically making an argument. You've got your major argument of the book and the sub-arguments underneath it that help it. So as you plan out the chapter, these are the steps we go through. We define the big thing. What is the argument we're making? You describe it, examples, and backup. And remember, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Nico's book, the sort of chapter that he wrote on being bold, how non-marketers can act and think like marketers. And one of his chapters is about be bold. And that's the argument. Non-marketers need to be more bold. So the core thing to know about this is that one of the things that I wanted to help people do is understand, all right, do you have all the right pieces in there to make sure it's good? And how do you know what's effective and what's not effective? And so I went back through all of the feedback I'd given for the last couple of years to authors, probably about 200 manuscript feedback forms. And what I realized is all of my feedback for nonfiction authors was clustering around 8 components. 8 components of a chapter is what I would be looking for to see, do you have all the pieces there? And so this is what we're trying to understand from our checklist is, does your manuscript do a good job, an effective job at having all these pieces to make it work? The hook, the personal stories, primary interview-driven stories, secondary interview-driven stories, teaching and lessons, personal narrative and opinions, research and data, and expert opinions. These are the 8 things that we want to make sure, the kind of the raw ingredients components to make sure that we can make this chapter effective. And if we have all those things and each one of these pieces or components are effective, well, then when we stitch them together, we sort of have these pieces, suddenly now this thing becomes really well driven. And just so you can understand what it's like on the creative author side, this is what it looks like on fiction. Different set of 8 items, but still 8. Protagonist, secondary characters, plot, setting, style, tone, theme. So this is what those individuals are going through. Now, the important thing to know is when we look back at these 8 elements, what we want to understand is how do we make sure that our sort of collection of these things is effective? And so what we're really looking to see is each component effective or not effective? Remember, the overarching goal of the chapter is to make an argument, and we want to make sure each of those components that are in there to help us make this argument are effective or not effective. And so one of the things that you're going to see your editor doing, and even you, is going through and making sure you have all the 8 elements, or is it intentional that you've chosen not to use one? And then is each component effective? The way that I would describe this, especially as someone who's read a lot of manuscripts, is we want to know, does the component in that chapter work? Does it work to kind of, again, make the case and support in that way? So that's what we're really looking for. And so, again, there's quite a bit of subjectivity in it to it, but to understand what we're looking for in this effectivity, you have to understand kind of the core things that we're looking for. We want to know, is each and every component relevant and engaging? Relevant and engaging. So relevant is this idea of like, does it make sense for what the chapter is, the overall argument? Engaging is it effective? Like, does it have this component note to it where it's compelling in the way we do it? So when you think about each component, for example, I'm going to go back to Nico. If you want to, look at in that chapter about being bold, he has a story about Sarah Graz, and Sarah Graz tells this story about how she was kicked out of college and sort of, for doing something that was fairly bold, and how that's paid off in her career. And so is that component, that sort of primary interview, relevant? Yeah, it does. It sort of lines up exactly with what he's saying. Now, maybe he had a different check component in there that would have been something that's more, not on track about be boldness. And it wasn't. Then it doesn't seem to have that effectivity to it. There's something wrong with that component. The second part of it is this idea of engaging. Is that component compelling? Does it help actually make you believe? And so going back to that example again, where he had Sarah Graz as that story. Well, in the story, Sarah Graz was kicked out of college and then went on to become a really talented growth marketer. Well, What if it didn't have that part about being a growth marketer? She was just kicked out of college. So yeah, it does support the argument. You need to be bolder if she'd gone on to be a marketer. But if she's not kind of doing anything really with it, is it compelling? Does it make you believe? No. You want to figure out how to tell that story in a compelling way. So that's what we're trying to really do here. And now this is helpful not only for you as you go through chapter by chapter and make sure, do you have each component being effective, but also the feedback's going to come in those same pieces. And so what's going to happen is, as your editor, and not only your developmental editor, but your acquiring editor and eventually your revisions editor, they're going to be looking at each of the components and saying, hey, is the hook effective or is it not effective? They may say, hey, there's not a personal story in here. Is that intentional or not? It's missing right now? And then particularly they'll look at ones that are ineffective, saying, hey, your secondary interviews in this one, they weren't particularly effective for me. I mean, I understood them, but they didn't really seem that they were that relevant or that compelling. So I think we want to focus our energy there. And the reason this will help you a lot is, number one, it gives you a sense of where your strengths are and where the things that you could use work on, as well as really will help you start to understand, all right, what, when I do revisions, do I need to focus on? So that's the biggest part of what this is really designed to help you do, is start to understand with every component, is it supporting the argument? Is it relevant? And is it compelling? Now, again, the core thing for each of you as you think about it, don't sort of necessarily worry. It's hard to judge your own work to say, hey, is this relevant or is this, is this engaging? Hard to do it. But the most important thing you can do is make sure that every single one of the chapters that you write that has all the components in it, or you're intentional not choosing them, saying, hey, I'm not going to include personal stories, or hey, I really don't want to have expert opinions, or whatever it is, using that to sort of say, hey, I've intentionally done it. It's about being intentional in those sorts of pieces. And then when you see the feedback as it comes, that's how it will help you. So that's really what this idea is. And again, if you think about the build that we've done, the first thing in writing a chapter is inventorying it, making sure you have all the right pieces that you want to pull together, then organizing it based on some kind of a structured flow to make the argument sort of make sense. Then we looked at unique pieces of it under book models. And then lastly, when you go back through, you can say, all right, do I have all the pieces? And when you get feedback on it, you'll know what those pieces are. So that's really the flow we've been building to. So I'll pause there for any questions or thoughts. Looks like Priyanka has a question a little bit about this. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. This is really helpful to kind of frame the, should it stay or should it go argument that I've been having with myself. I guess my question is, let's say you have something that you could make it effective, you could make it compelling by adding in the research or the stats or the this or that. But what if you're finding that particular thing is just taking a long time? It's taking all this extra things and it's requiring a whole lot of extra work. In that case, in that instance, should we nix it in favor of something else that may not require so much work or advocating for?
So what I would tell you is this. I think that part of it is it's sort of to give yourself and your future reviewers commentary on what your plans are. So if there's a piece that you're like, I know this is important, I know I can make it effective, but it's going to take me work to do it, and I just don't got time right now, put brackets in there and say, need to expand this one for now. So there's not a sense that you have to sort of make it work right now. It's more about being aware of what it is. And I think that's really what the design of this whole thing is to do. I will tell you, one of my least favorite things to do in a book writing process is revisions. I hate revisions because it feels like I already did this stuff. Why am I doing it? It's not my favorite thing. So what this will help you give a sense of is, where do you need to focus your energy? Because if something is working, right, whether it's perfect yet, it's a different problem. But if it generally works in it, you can always make things better, but you'd rather focus on the things that are not working, right? This doesn't feel like it's effective yet. So if it's close to it, if you add a few things to it, you can add those things and make it sort of effective, versus something like, feels like you need a whole different rewrite on this one. This isn't working from a relevancy or a sort of a compelling standpoint. You might want to try something a little different. So that's the way I would think about it is, if you've gone through the trouble and you know that it's there, it's just going to take more work, save it. This could be something in revisions. And remember, from a timing standpoint, you're going to submit your first draft at the end of June. There is this month where you really don't have any obligations to the manuscript. Your acquiring editor will have it. They'll be reading it. So you can certainly go back through at that point and add stuff that's missing. And then you'll have sort of a 10-week revision process thereafter where you can do these things. So there's plenty of time to do it. I would just sort of communicate to yourself, hey, put this thing on the side for now. I'm going to come back to it when I'm in a better place to do it. So that's a good question. Other questions about this? Yeah, so that's the biggest thing that I would sort of say on this one. And I'll kind of wrap up here, and then I'll give you guys some time in sort of small group time here tonight if you guys want to chat with each other a little bit. But the key thing as you sort of think about what's to come, what's ahead here, what now, biggest things we talked about here is, again, sort of use what's ahead coming up here, write your introduction if you haven't yet, sketch out your table of contents. What are the key sub-arguments you're making? If you haven't done your publishing strategy call, do it. It can be a nice little motivator. And then just write, get as much content down. Don't worry about it. It's all first draft. And then work towards this May 10th, May 11th deadline, getting the content in there. Do as much as you can, get it off your plate, and just get a good sense of where you're at. And remember really what we've been doing, just to kind of recap on what we've been doing on the manuscript building stuff. We start from this idea of book models. What do you want your book to look like? How do you map it out? And how do you start to, Adam Grantify or whatever it is your content to basically give it that flow to it? And it starts by inventorying. What is the inventory that you have, the content you want to do in it? And then we start to use that content we want to do and start to sort of borrow structures from other people, find those things that help us understand how it fits into our book model, and eventually sort of map out how do we actually want the chapter to flow. We then sort of plug in the content from our inventory, and voila, you've got, again, sort of as Priyanka said, kind of a sort of, it's hodgepodgey, but it's there, right? And that's really what we're starting to go through. And then as you start to look back through it, you can sort of go through and take your checklist and say, all right, does this have all the right pieces? Where do I need to focus my energy and where not? And I think as you sort of spend your time over the coming weeks here, get that table of contents out, because that'll make sure you know all the arguments. I think Priyanka's point was a little bit of like, now it's all structured. Now I just need to sort of start to fill in the blank, start to fill it in, add those content you have or what you want to write. And then again, try to build out those first couple chapters. And I think what you'll see is the goal is just like with writing stories. You finish a chapter, you get it to your editor, they give you feedback, you process the feedback, and then when you write the next chapter, you sort of use and apply some of that as you go. But this will be fun. I mean, it is, I know, sort of a stressful period, but use this as a way to say, hey, I've learned how to write chapters. This is the way you make compelling arguments in a kind of a rich, robust way. You'll find this will help a lot of your other writing as you do it. So take a stab at it. And if you have questions as you go, definitely work with your editor along the way. So any last questions here on kind of our chapter sequencing things? And again, you'll probably have them as you apply it, right? Like, gosh, like I know Eric said something about this one. So feel free to, chat with me or editor, whatever it is as you go. But I think the most important part is just to try and sort of be kind to yourself. Like this is not meant to be, you're writing like a misspelled War and Peace right now. It's not going to be great yet, but by having something there and adding to it, it'll get there pretty soon. So any last questions?
I was gonna ask about taking like those 8 elements and kind of wireframing those into like just like with little annotations for myself as I'm doing my chapter structure, because I'm thinking a lot about the structure, and like I'll probably do a headline wherever there's a lesson. So, I might not have the copy for the headline, but it's like brackets, this is my lesson, or this is my personal story. And is that comfortable to stay in all the way through the manuscript phase?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. You should keep, what I would tell you is all the annotations, all the notes from editors and stuff like that, just keep them sort of rolling. And when you copy stuff, just paste it so it carries over. Eventually, in our final version, we will take those things out, but carry them over. And again, when you get to that point, revise it. You can resolve it or leave it there, whatever it is. But yeah, leave it as long as you're working on stuff.
Okay.
I wanted to comment because I had written my intro, and then I find that as I'm writing more content, I need to go back to the intro and like slightly edit it or reframe it. Like, is that normal? Because I'm finding that it's not completely like
your introduction will probably be the thing that you edit the most. You'll probably change it like, a dozen times. It's just because it's one of those things that it's supposed to make the case. And you're like, but wait a second, now this is different here. I got to change something. So don't be surprised. It's kind of a nice way to have that like one place where it's like, this is the big argument that I'm making. So it's very natural to have happen. Don't be surprised if it happens. And in some ways, what you may find is, oh my gosh, this is a much better story to have in my hook story or whatever it is. So you may find that you may move pieces around, but usually it'll start to get less and less and less as you go, but certainly not uncommon at all.
Thanks.
I know one thing I've noticed too is I've tried to be very kind of almost assembly line about writing, and it just never works out that way.
Yeah.
And like one document will start and then it just turns into a mess and then I get overwhelmed. So yeah, I'm just anticipating, and I probably need to just write a lot more, but that each story will mushroom, and in each story, like 4 stories emerge. And yeah, I don't know if you have any tips to keep things organized.
Yeah, I mean, the part of it that I would tell you is like you have all these things that you can kind of internalize, but it's sort of like as Mike Tyson says, your plan goes out the window when I punch you in the mouth, right? Like, so what I will tell you in this one is sort of, you've seen all these pieces and I share them now so that you can have them in your subconscious. You will start to naturally do some of these things as you go. But here's the other thing, like at the end of the day, deadlines are also really helpful to get content down and get these sorts of things. What you'll find is when you actually get that momentum and sit down with this and you start to put content to pen to paper, you'll have internalized more of these things than you may have thought. You'll be tracking and keeping that sort of stuff. So that's really what I would say is, especially for those of you that have deadline writing in you, you'll find now you'll be a more effective deadline writer than if you hadn't. So you'll get there, don't worry. And that's why we revise, right? We take things that are messy and revise anyways. So.
Yeah. Also, is that bookcase behind you real?
Nope, it's not. It's not a real book. I'm in my in-laws' house now, so we're quarantining, as I like to call it. And so this is my it's not a real bookcase. But good eye, Jeremy. I give you props. Looks a little sketchy. It is sketchy. This was my
no, it's beautiful, but it's just not real. It like took me a minute.
I appreciate it. Well, with that, party people, I am going to let you guys hang out if you want here, and I'm going to go do another positioning call with an author. So I'll just leave this sort of running here. I'll duck away. I'm just going to leave you guys in this one. Feel free to chat, hang out here. I won't close the room, but I'll duck away here, and I'll see you guys next week. Next week will just be discussion. We'll use these sorts of sessions, half hour every week, just to kind of keep you guys on pace. With that, floor is yours, and I'll see you guys back here next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Eric.
I'm